I rushed into the hospital, my heart pounding against my ribcage like a desperate prisoner. The call had come during my weekly bridge game. Jason was in the ICU after a car accident. Critical condition. Might not make it through the night. Words no mother should ever hear about her child, no matter if that child is 38 years old. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I hurried toward the intensive care unit, my sensible shoes squeaking against the polished floors. Despite my 63 years and arthritic knee, I moved with the desperate energy that only maternal fear can generate. "Jason Caldwell," I gasped at the nurse's station. "I'm Margaret Caldwell, his mother." The young nurse looked up, recognition crossing her face. "Mrs. Caldwell?" "Yes. Let me page Nurse Jenkins. She's overseeing your son's care." I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. After losing Henry 12 years ago to a sudden heart attack, Jason was all I had left. My brilliant, kind-hearted boy who still called me every Sunday without fail, who never forgot my birthday or Mother's Day, who had somehow managed to become the man his father and I had always hoped he would be. "Mrs. Caldwell?" I turned to see a woman in her early 40s approaching, her scrubs neat, despite the long shift evident in her tired eyes. Her badge identified her as Heather Jenkins, head ICU nurse. "Yes, I'm Margaret Caldwell. Please, I need to see my son." She nodded, but instead of leading me down the hall, she took my elbow and guided me to a small alcove away from the desk. Her expression was professional, but tinged with something else: concern, suspicion. "Mrs. Caldwell, your son is stabilized for now. The next 24 hours will be critical." Her voice was low, measured. "He has multiple internal injuries, a severe concussion, and we're monitoring for brain swelling." "The accident? They said his brakes failed?" My voice cracked. Nurse Jenkins glanced around quickly, then leaned closer. "That's what was reported. Yes." Something in her tone made me pay closer attention. After 40 years as a psychology professor, I developed a finely tuned sense for when people were communicating more than their words conveyed. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then met my eyes directly. "Your daughter-in-law has been here since we contacted her, along with a man she introduced as your son's colleague and friend." "That would be Scott, probably," I said. "He's Jason's best friend, works with him at Westbrook. They've known each other since college." Nurse Jenkins nodded slowly. "Mrs. Caldwell, I've been an ICU nurse for 20 years. You develop instincts in this job about people, about relationships." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Something isn't right about their behavior. They're not acting like a worried wife and friend should. There's something off in their interactions when they think no one is watching." A cold feeling began to spread through my chest. "What do you mean?" "I can't put my finger on it exactly, but—" She checked her watch. "They're in your son's room now. His condition is stable enough for limited visitation." Her grip on my arm tightened slightly. "Before you go in, I want you to do something for me, Mrs. Caldwell." "What?" "Room 214 is at the end of that corridor. The door is partially open." She spoke barely above a whisper now. "Please hide yourself just outside the door and listen for a moment before you enter. If I'm wrong, no harm done. But if I'm right—" She trailed off, her expression grave. Under normal circumstances, I might have dismissed such an unusual request, but something in her eyes, professional concern mixed with human compassion, made me nod in agreement. "Trust me," she said, releasing my arm. "I'll be at the nurse's station. Take your time." I made my way down the corridor, my thoughts racing. What could possibly be suspicious about Vanessa and Scott's behavior? Vanessa had been part of our family for 5 years now. Though I'd always sensed a certain ambition behind her polished exterior, Jason adored her, and that had been enough for me. As I approached room 214, I could hear low voices from within. Following Nurse Jenkins' instructions, I positioned myself against the wall just outside the partially open door, feeling slightly ridiculous, but too concerned to ignore her warning. "Need to find that drive." Scott's voice, tense and urgent. "If anyone sees what's on it, we're both finished." "I already checked his home office," Vanessa replied, her tone chillingly businesslike for a woman whose husband lay critically injured. "It's not there. He must have hidden it somewhere else or taken it to work." "Damn it, Vanessa. That drive has everything. The fake vendor accounts, the transfer records, all of it. Plus our emails. If anyone finds it, no one will find it." She cut in sharply. "We'll get access to his office tomorrow. I'm his wife. They'll let me collect his personal items. And if he wakes up? Scott's voice dropped even lower, forcing me to strain to hear. The doctors said there's still a chance. A pause. Then Vanessa's voice, cold and clear. Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't get the opportunity to talk, won't we? The brake line method almost worked. We just need to be more thorough next time. My heart nearly stopped. Brake line, method, next time. The words echoed in my head as the horrible truth crystallized. This was supposed to be clean, Scott hissed. An accident, case closed. Now we're talking about protecting ourselves, Vanessa interrupted. About the 2 million we've already moved, and the millions more we can take once I have control of Jason's accounts. About spending the rest of our lives together instead of sneaking around. Isn't that what you want? Of course it is, but then stop whining and focus. Once the company pays out his life insurance and I sell the house, we'll have more than enough to disappear. Brazil, maybe. Or Thailand. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself, nauseated by what I was hearing. My son's wife and best friend weren't just having an affair. They had tried to kill him, had nearly succeeded, and were planning to finish the job if he regained consciousness. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me as I fought to contain a scream of rage and horror. My Jason, my only child, betrayed in the most fundamental way possible by the two people he should have been able to trust most. In that moment, something hardened inside me, a core of cold determination forming around the white-hot pain. They would not succeed, not while I still breathed. I had lost my husband. I would not lose my son. I stepped back from the door silently, decades of motherhood having taught me how to move without making a sound. My mind was racing, calculating options with a clarity that surprised me despite my shock. If I confronted them now, I'd have no proof beyond my word against theirs. They would deny everything, paint me as a hysterical, paranoid old woman. No, I needed evidence. A soft touch on my shoulder nearly made me jump. Nurse Jenkins had appeared beside me, her expression confirming she'd anticipated exactly what I would overhear. "Follow me," she whispered, guiding me around the corner to a small consultation room. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to face me. "You heard them? They tried to kill my son," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They sabotaged his car, and they're planning to finish the job if he regains consciousness." Heather nodded grimly. I suspected something when they arrived. Their body language, the way they whispered to each other when they thought no one was watching. Then I overheard fragments of conversation, enough to be concerned. She hesitated. "Mrs. Caldwell, have you contacted the police?" "With what evidence?" I asked, my professor's mind already analyzing the problem from multiple angles. It would be my word against theirs. Vanessa is young, attractive, seemingly devoted. She's been playing the grieving wife perfectly for the hospital staff, hasn't she? "Until you look closely," Heather agreed. "I've seen genuine grief hundreds of times in this unit. Hers is performed. And Scott? The supportive friend, standing by her side. But his eyes follow her when she moves. They stand slightly too close when they think no one's watching." She shook her head. "Small things, but they add up." "They mentioned a drive," I said, thinking aloud. "Something with evidence of fraud at their company. Jason must have discovered what they were doing." "And confronted them?" "No," I said, knowing my son. "Jason would gather all the facts first. He's methodical, always has been. Even as a child, he would line up his evidence before coming to me with a request." A thought struck me. When did they say the accident happened? "Around 8:30 last night. Single vehicle accident on Route 9. His car went off the road on a curve, hit a tree." My mind flashed to the last text I'd received from Jason yesterday evening. "Mom, check your email. Sent you some photos from the company picnic. Love you." Jason never sent me photos via email. He normally shared them through our family photo cloud. It had seemed odd at the time, but I'd been busy with my book club and hadn't checked my email yet. "I need to check something," I said, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. I opened my email and found Jason's message from 8:03 p.m. last night. There was indeed an attachment, but the subject line now seemed ominous. "For safekeeping." "He knew," I whispered, staring at the unopened email. "He knew he was in danger." Heather looked over my shoulder. "Is that the evidence?" "Possibly." I didn't open it, suddenly aware that my email could be accessed from other devices at home. "I need to be careful. They're looking for this drive, but they might also check his online accounts." "Mrs. Caldwell," Heather said gently, "I need to ask, What are you planning to do? As a medical professional, I'm mandated to report suspected crimes, but without concrete evidence. I straightened my shoulders, feeling every one of my 63 years, and yet somehow stronger than I'd felt in a decade. I'm going to protect my son. I'm going to expose them. But I need time and I need your help. She studied my face, seeming to measure my resolve. What do you need from me? First, I need to see Jason. Then I need information about his condition that I can trust, not filtered through Vanessa. And I need to know when they visit, what they say, what they do. She nodded. I can manage that. But Mrs. Caldwell, if they really tried to kill him once and are planning to try again, they won't succeed, I said with quiet certainty. Because they don't know I'm onto them. They'll see only a grieving mother, too distraught to be a threat. It was a role I knew I could play convincingly, because half of it wasn't an act. The grief and fear were real. I was simply channeling them into determination rather than despair. Let me take you to see your son now, Heather said. They've gone to the cafeteria. We have about 20 minutes. She led me down the hall to room 214. Despite her warning about Jason's condition, nothing could have prepared me for the sight of my strong, vital son lying motionless among a tangle of tubes and wires, his face bruised and swollen almost beyond recognition. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and steady beep of monitors created a mechanical backdrop to the too-still form in the bed. "Oh, Jason," I whispered, moving to his side and gently taking his hand, the only part of him that seemed uninjured. "I'm here now. You're not alone." "He's heavily sedated," Heather explained quietly. "The doctors induced a coma to help control the brain swelling. His vitals are stable, but critical." "What are his chances?" I asked, not taking my eyes off my son's face. "Dr. Hawkins is the attending physician. He'll discuss the details with you, but—" She hesitated, then continued with professional candor. "The next 48 hours are crucial. If the swelling subsides without complications, his prognosis improves significantly." I nodded, absorbing this. So they have a narrow window. If they're going to finish the job, as Vanessa put it, it would be soon. "We have security protocols," Heather assured me. "And now that I'm aware of potential, intentional harm, I can implement additional monitoring without raising suspicions." "Thank you," I said, still holding Jason's hand. "Is Dr. Hawkins available? I'd like to speak with him as soon as possible. He'll be making rounds within the hour. I'll make sure he speaks with you privately." I nodded, then leaned closer to Jason. "I'm going to fix this," I promised him softly. "Just keep fighting. Don't leave me, sweetheart. Not like this. Not because of them." As I straightened, I caught sight of a small travel bag in the corner, Jason's personal effects that had been brought in with him. A plan began to form in my mind. "Heather," I said quietly, "when Vanessa and Scott return, I need to play a role. They can't suspect I know anything. I'll be the distraught mother, focused only on my son's recovery, completely trusting of his loving wife. And behind that," I met her gaze steadily, "behind that, I'll be gathering every piece of evidence I can find to protect my son and bring them to justice." The monitoring equipment continued its reassuring rhythm as I settled into the chair beside Jason's bed, already preparing myself for the performance of my lifetime. Vanessa and Scott believed they were dealing with a helpless, grief-stricken old woman. They had no idea who they were really facing, a mother with nothing left to lose. I heard their voices before they entered the room, Vanessa's practiced tone of concern and Scott's deeper murmur of support. Quickly, I wiped away genuine tears and composed my face into an expression of maternal distress rather than the rage that burned beneath my skin. The door swung open. Vanessa entered first, her sleek blonde hair pulled back in a perfectly disheveled ponytail, just messy enough to suggest worry, but still flattering. Her eyes widened in apparent surprise. "Margaret, when did you get here?" She rushed forward, arms outstretched for an embrace that I forced myself to accept. "About 20 minutes ago," I said, allowing my voice to tremble. "The hospital called me during my bridge game." "I tried calling you too," she said, pulling back to study my face with well-simulated concern. "You poor thing, you must be devastated." Over her shoulder, Scott hovered in the doorway, his handsome face arranged in an appropriate mask of somber worry. I'd known him for nearly 15 years, had welcomed him into our home countless times, had treated him like family. Now, looking at him with my new awareness, I wondered how I had missed the calculation behind his friendly demeanor. "Hello, Scott," I said, injecting warmth into my voice. "Thank you for being here for Vanessa." "Of course," he replied, stepping forward to place a comforting hand on my shoulder, the same hand that had sabotaged my son's brakes. I fought the urge to recoil. "Jason's my best friend. I still can't believe this happened." "The police said it looks like brake failure," Vanessa explained, moving to stand on the opposite side of Jason's bed, carefully taking his hand in a gesture that would appear loving to any observer. "Such a freak accident." "His poor car," I murmured, watching their faces carefully. "He loved that Audi." "The important thing is that he pulls through," Scott said quickly. "Too quickly?" I nodded, turning my attention back to Jason. "The nurse, Jenkins, I think, said they've induced a coma? To control brain swelling?" "Dr. Hawkins says it's standard procedure," Vanessa replied, her voice steady. Not the trembling voice of a wife terrified of losing her husband, but the controlled tone of someone reciting information. "They'll begin bringing him out of it once the swelling subsides. If it subsides," she added, with just the right catch in her voice. "He's strong," I said, genuinely stroking Jason's arm. "He's always been a fighter." "Margaret," Vanessa said, her tone shifting to something gentler, more intimate. "You must be exhausted. Why don't you let Scott drive you home? You can rest, shower, maybe pack a bag if you want to stay closer to the hospital. I'll remain here with Jason." Alarm bells rang in my mind. They wanted me gone. Away from Jason, away from the hospital where I might overhear something else, away from any potential evidence. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said, reaching into my purse for a tissue. "But I couldn't possibly leave him now, not until I've spoken with the doctor." I saw a flicker of annoyance cross her perfect features before she smoothed it away. "Of course. We'll all wait then." For the next 40 minutes, we maintained an excruciating charade of family solidarity around Jason's bed. I asked appropriate questions about the accident, listening carefully as they recounted their carefully constructed version. Jason working late, driving home tired, the tragic brake failure on a curve he'd driven hundreds of times before. I nodded sympathetically when Vanessa described finding his home office in disarray. "He must have been working on something important," she said, eyes darting briefly to Scott. Throughout it all, I played my role. The somewhat frail mother, occasionally confused by medical terminology, completely trusting of her daughter-in-law, grateful for the support of her son's best friend. I even made a show of taking my blood pressure medication, reinforcing their perception of me as physically vulnerable. When Dr. William Hawkins finally entered, I felt a surge of relief at seeing a familiar face. Bill had been a colleague at the university before he left academia for medical practice, and we had maintained a friendly acquaintance over the years. "Margaret," he said, genuine concern in his voice as he clasped my hand. "I'm so sorry about Jason." "Bill," I responded, allowing real emotion to color my voice. "Please, tell me everything." He glanced around the room, taking in Vanessa and Scott, then focused on me. "Let me update all of you on Jason's condition," he began professionally. He outlined the injuries in clinical detail: multiple rib fractures, a punctured lung, internal bleeding that had been surgically repaired, and the traumatic brain injury that necessitated the induced coma. "When will he wake up?" Vanessa asked, her hand still performing its caress of Jason's arm. "That depends on how the swelling responds to treatment," Dr. Hawkins replied. "We're monitoring intracranial pressure closely. Best case scenario, we could begin reducing sedation in 48 to 72 hours. I caught the subtle exchange of glances between Vanessa and Scott, a window of opportunity for them. "And worst case?" I asked, drawing attention back to me. Bill's expression softened. "Margaret, let's focus on the positive indicators for now. Jason's vital signs are stable, the surgical repairs are holding, and he's receiving the best care possible. I'd like to speak with you privately if I may," I said, rising from my chair with deliberate shakiness. "About Jason's medical history, there might be things he hasn't shared with Vanessa yet." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "We can use the consultation room." "I should be part of this," Vanessa interjected, a hint of sharpness breaking through her concerned facade. "As his wife, dear, it's just some old medical history," I said soothingly. "Nothing relevant to his current treatment, I'm sure, but I'd feel better sharing it." "Mother's instinct," I added with a self-deprecating smile. "You know how we worry." Vanessa relented with obvious reluctance, unable to object without seeming unreasonable. Of course, Margaret. Take your time. Once in the private consultation room, Dr. Hawkins's professional demeanor shifted to personal concern. Margaret, how are you really holding up? This must be devastating. I looked directly into his eyes. Bill, I need to know if Nurse Jenkins spoke with you about her observations. His expression confirmed my suspicion. She shared her concerns with me an hour ago, about Jason's wife and his friend, and about a conversation she believes you overheard. It wasn't an accident, I said flatly. They sabotaged his car. They're having an affair and stealing from their company. Jason discovered it and they tried to kill him. To his credit, Bill didn't dismiss my claim or suggest I was confused by grief. Instead, he asked, "Do you have evidence of this?" "Not yet, but Jason may have sent me some." I explained about the email I hadn't yet opened, and they mentioned needing to find a drive with incriminating information. Margaret, if what you're saying is true, this is a police matter, and I will go to the police, I assured him, when I have concrete evidence. Right now, it would be my word against theirs, and they've crafted their story carefully. He studied me thoughtfully. What do you need from me? Protection for Jason. They mentioned finishing what they started if he regains consciousness. I need to know he's safe while I gather evidence. Bill nodded slowly. I can arrange for continuous monitoring, restrict visitation under medical pretenses, and personally supervise any changes to his treatment plan. He hesitated. But Margaret, be careful. If they're desperate enough to attempt murder once, I know, I said grimly. But they don't see me as a threat, Bill. They see a grieving old woman, too distraught to be suspicious. I leaned forward, and that's exactly the disguise I need to bring them down. As we returned to Jason's room, I straightened my shoulders and slipped back into character, the worried mother, focused solely on her son's recovery, utterly oblivious to the vipers at her side. The most important performance of my life had just begun. The next morning found me dozing uncomfortably in the reclining chair beside Jason's bed, having insisted on staying overnight despite Vanessa's repeated offers to let poor Margaret get some proper rest. I had pretended to sleep through much of the night, but in reality, I'd been observing, listening, planning. Vanessa had finally left around 11 p.m., with Scott offering to drive her home, both making a show of reluctance for my benefit. Call me immediately if anything changes, she'd instructed the night nurse, with just the right note of worried authority. Once alone with my son, I'd spent hours whispering reassurances to him, hoping that somewhere in his sedated state, he could hear me. I'm going to fix this, Jason. Just keep fighting. Now, as morning light filtered through the blinds, I checked my watch. 6:15 a.m. Shift change would happen soon, and Heather would be back on duty. I needed to move quickly. I pulled out my phone and created a new email account with a random username, then forwarded Jason's for safekeeping email to it without opening the attachment. If Vanessa had access to Jason's accounts, I couldn't risk her seeing that I'd viewed it. Next, I deleted the forwarded message and emptied my trash folder. A soft knock at the door announced Heather's arrival. She entered quietly, checking Jason's vitals with professional efficiency before turning to me. You didn't go home, she observed, her voice low. I couldn't leave him, I replied, honestly. She nodded, understanding. Dr. Hawkins has implemented the additional monitoring protocols we discussed. Jason won't be left unattended at any point, and we've restricted who can administer medications. Thank you, I whispered, glancing at my still unconscious son. Any change overnight? The intracranial pressure has stabilized, she reported. That's a positive sign. Dr. Hawkins will do a full assessment during morning rounds. She hesitated, then added, Mrs. Caldwell, I have a 20-minute break at 7:30. If you wanted to get some coffee in the cafeteria, I could keep you company. I understood her meaning immediately. A chance to talk away from potential eavesdroppers in a public place where Vanessa or Scott wouldn't interrupt. That sounds lovely, I replied. I could use the caffeine. At precisely 7:30, after ensuring Jason was being monitored by another nurse Heather trusted, I made my way to the cafeteria. Heather joined me at a corner table, setting down 2 cups of steaming coffee. Thank you, I said, gratefully accepting the cup. For everything, she nodded, her expression serious. I spoke with the night staff. Vanessa called twice overnight to check on Jason's condition. That seems appropriately concerned, I noted. Yes, except she specifically asked if he was showing any signs of regaining consciousness. Each time, Heather stirred her coffee thoughtfully. That's not typically what family members focus on first. They ask about vital signs, pain levels, overall stability. She's worried he'll wake up and talk, I said grimly. That would be my interpretation. She leaned forward. Mrs. Caldwell, have you had a chance to look at whatever Jason sent you? Not yet. I forwarded it to a secure account. I'll need privacy and a computer to examine it properly. Heather considered this. The hospital has a small family resource room with computers. It's usually empty this early. Perfect, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude for this ally I'd found. But I need one more favor. If Vanessa or Scott arrives while I'm gone, I'll page you immediately, she promised. The resource room is on the first floor, room 104. You'll need this to access the computers. She slid a visitor pass across the table. 20 minutes later, I sat alone in the small room, logging into the new email account I'd created. With trembling hands, I opened Jason's message. The subject line, for safekeeping, felt even more ominous now. Mom, if you're reading this, I trust my instincts were right. Something doesn't add up with the financials at Westbrook, and I've been digging deeper. Attached is everything I've found so far. I don't know who's involved yet, but the numbers don't lie. Someone's been siphoning money through fake vendor accounts for at least 18 months. I'm backing this up several ways because I don't know who to trust. Keep this safe. I'll explain everything when I see you Sunday for dinner. Love you, Jason. My heart constricted. He'd been planning to tell me everything at our regular Sunday dinner, an event that would now never happen. I wiped away tears and opened the attached zip file. What I found was a meticulous compilation of financial records, internal emails, and Jason's own detailed notes. He'd discovered a sophisticated scheme where funds were being diverted to shell companies that existed only on paper. The supporting documentation was thorough, but would require financial expertise to fully analyze. Then I found something that made my breath catch, a series of screenshots from the company's security system. Jason had apparently accessed the log of after-hours building entries. Multiple entries showed Vanessa and Scott accessing the building late at night, often within minutes of each other, on evenings when Jason was traveling for business. But the smoking gun was an audio file, labeled simply Office Conversation MP3. With shaking hands, I plugged in the headphones provided at the computer station and pressed play. No one suspects anything, Vanessa's voice came through clearly. Jason's too busy with the Anderson account to notice the discrepancies. We need to accelerate the timeline, Scott replied. The audit team starts next month. Once we move the final payment, we need to be ready to disappear. What about Jason? Vanessa asked, her tone disturbingly casual. What about him? Scott's voice hardened. You said you were handling that part. A soft laugh. Don't worry. Once we're ready, I'll file for divorce. The prenup is void if he's unfaithful, and I've been laying the groundwork with his colleagues, suggesting he seems distant, working late with his assistant. Smart girl, Scott murmured, followed by sounds that could only be kissing. We just need to be patient for a few more weeks, Vanessa continued. Keep everything normal. He doesn't suspect a thing. But Jason had suspected. He had discovered not only their financial fraud, but likely their affair as well. And when he confronted them, or when they realized he was on to them, their plan had changed from divorce to murder. I checked the date on the audio file, 3 weeks ago. Their scheme had clearly accelerated when they realized Jason was investigating, but they didn't know about this evidence. They were looking for a drive, not realizing Jason had already sent the information to me. I quickly copied all the files to the cloud storage account I maintained for my research before logging out. As I was leaving the resource room, my phone buzzed with a text from Heather. They're here, both of them. Taking a deep breath, I composed myself and headed back to the ICU, the weight of what I'd discovered heavy on my shoulders but strengthening my resolve. I had the evidence. Now I needed a plan to use it without putting Jason or myself in further danger. When I returned to Jason's room, I found Vanessa perched at his bedside, holding his hand with practiced concern, while Scott stood by the window, scrolling through his phone. Both looked up as I entered, their expressions shifting to identical masks of sympathy. Margaret, Vanessa said, rising to embrace me. You look exhausted. Did you manage to get any sleep in that awful chair? Enough, I replied, patting her arm before moving to Jason's side. Any changes this morning? Dr. Hawkins was just here, Scott offered. He said the pressure in Jason's brain is stabilizing. Good news, apparently. I nodded, studying my son's face for any signs of change. The bruising seemed more pronounced in the morning light, yellowing at the edges. My heart ached at the sight, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm. I spoke with him as well, in the cafeteria. I lied smoothly. He's cautiously optimistic. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. You should have called me if you were speaking with the doctor. It was just a brief encounter, I explained, arranging my features into an apologetic smile. I didn't want to disturb you so early. You need your rest too, dear. That's thoughtful, but I want to be informed about every development, she insisted, a hint of steel beneath the concern. I am his wife, after all. Of course, I agreed mildly. I wasn't thinking clearly. You know how it is at my age? The mind wanders. I saw the subtle exchange of glances between them. Relief, perhaps, at this confirmation of my supposed mental fragility. Margaret, Scott said, stepping forward. We were just discussing how to handle Jason's affairs while he's incapacitated. There are matters at work that need attention, bills to be paid, that sort of thing. Vanessa can handle all that, I'm sure, I replied, deliberately obtuse. She has power of attorney, doesn't she? Another glance between them. For some matters, Vanessa said carefully, but there are certain accounts and files that only Jason can access. Work-related materials, mainly. His colleagues must be devastated, I commented, watching their reactions. Jason always spoke so highly of the team at Westbrook. We're all in shock, Scott confirmed smoothly. The office sent those flowers. He gestured to an elaborate arrangement I hadn't noticed before. How thoughtful. I moved closer to examine the card. Get well soon, Jason. Your Westbrook family is thinking of you. He always said Westbrook felt like family. Margaret, Vanessa said, her tone shifting to something more businesslike. We need to access Jason's home office. There are some important company documents he was working on. The problem is, he has a separate security system for that room that I don't have the code for. Oh? I blinked, feigning confusion. That seems unusual. Standard protocol for executives handling sensitive financial data, Scott interjected. But now we need those documents for an upcoming audit, and with Jason unable to help. I nodded slowly, as if processing this. Well, I don't have his security codes either. Jason is very careful about such things. Frustration flickered across Vanessa's perfect features before she smoothed it away. I thought perhaps he might have shared them with you. For emergencies. I'm afraid not, dear, I said, apologetically. Jason always kept his work life quite separate. You know how he is. Compartmentalizes everything. The monitor beside Jason's bed beeped, drawing our attention. Heather entered immediately, checking the readings with practiced efficiency. Just a small fluctuation in blood pressure, she explained. Nothing concerning, but I'd like to adjust his medication slightly. She turned to us. If you wouldn't mind stepping out for about 15 minutes while I take care of this and help the orderly change the bedding? Of course, Vanessa agreed reluctantly. We'll get some coffee. Margaret, would you like to join us? The thought of sitting across from them, pretending normalcy while knowing what they had done, what they were still planning to do, made my stomach churn. But I needed to maintain the charade a little longer. Actually, I said, putting a hand to my lower back and wincing slightly, I think I'll stretch my legs and walk a bit. This chair has been murder on my back. I'll text you when you can return, Heather promised as we all filed out. In the hallway, I made a show of walking slowly toward the elevator, waving off Vanessa and Scott's half-hearted offers to accompany me. Once they had disappeared toward the cafeteria, I changed direction and headed straight to Dr. Hawkins' office. To my relief, Bill was there, reviewing charts at his desk. He looked up in surprise as I knocked on his open door. Margaret, he said, rising quickly, is everything all right with Jason? No change, I assured him, stepping inside and closing the door. But I found something, Bill, evidence of what they've been doing, and why they tried to kill my son. His expression turned grave as he gestured for me to sit. Tell me. I explained about the files Jason had sent me, the financial records showing systematic theft, the security logs documenting Vanessa and Scott's late-night meetings, and most damning of all, the audio recording of them discussing their plans. This is definitive evidence of fraud, he agreed, but connecting it to the car accident will be more challenging. They mentioned a drive they're desperate to find, I reminded him. They're looking for physical evidence that Jason collected. They don't realize he sent copies to me. Bill considered this carefully. Margaret, with this information, You should go to the police immediately. Not yet, I insisted. I need more. Something that directly links them to the tampering with Jason's car. Otherwise, they could claim the financial fraud, and their affair are separate issues, unrelated to the accident. What are you planning? He asked, concern evident in his voice. They keep asking about Jason's home office. Apparently, he has a separate security system that Vanessa can't access. That's where they think the evidence is hidden. I leaned forward. I need to get into that office before they do. That's dangerous, Margaret. If they're desperate enough to attempt murder once, I know, I interrupted. But I'll be careful. They think I'm a harmless old woman who trusts them completely. My voice hardened. That's my advantage. Bill studied me thoughtfully. You need allies, Margaret. People who can help protect both you and Jason while you gather what you need. I have you and Heather, I pointed out. You need more, he insisted. Someone with legal authority. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I have a friend in the police department, Detective Mark Sullivan. We've known each other for years. He's discreet, thorough, and trustworthy. I considered this carefully. Could he investigate unofficially? If Vanessa or Scott get any hint of police involvement, Mark could keep it quiet until you have everything you need, Bill assured me. No official report, no uniforms, nothing to alert them. The prospect of additional support was tempting. As determined as I was, I recognized the danger of facing two killers alone. All right, I agreed finally. But I need to meet him first, explain everything myself. I'll set it up for today, Bill promised. In the meantime, keep playing along with them. Give no indication that you suspect anything. I nodded, rising from my chair. I should get back before they wonder where I've gone. Bill stopped me with a gentle hand on my arm. Margaret, be careful. What you're doing is brave, but these people have already shown they're willing to commit murder. They tried to kill my son, Bill, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. I'm not brave. I'm just a mother protecting her child, the way I have since the day he was born. As I made my way back to the ICU, I felt a new sense of purpose strengthening my resolve. I was no longer alone in this fight. With Bill, Heather, and soon this detective on my side, we would build an ironclad case against Vanessa and Scott, and God help them when we did. Detective Mark Sullivan was nothing like the police officers depicted on television. There was no rumpled trench coat or world-weary cynicism. Instead, the man who met me in Bill Hawkins' office that afternoon was trim, well-dressed, and possessed of a quiet attentiveness that I recognized from my years evaluating doctoral candidates, the hallmark of a keen, analytical mind. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, his handshake firm but not overpowering. Dr. Hawkins has given me a preliminary overview of your concerns. I'm very sorry about your son's situation. Thank you, Detective, I replied, taking the seat he offered. I appreciate your willingness to hear me out, especially under these unusual circumstances. Bill and I go back 20 years, he said simply. If he believes your concerns merit attention, that's good enough for me to listen. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented everything I had discovered. The overheard conversation between Vanessa and Scott, Jason's email and its contents, and my observations of their behavior since the accident. Detective Sullivan took minimal notes, instead listening with complete focus, occasionally asking precise, clarifying questions. May I see the files your son sent you? He asked when I had finished. I retrieved my tablet and pulled up the documents, watching as he examined them with practiced efficiency. His expression remained neutral, but I noticed the slight tightening around his eyes as he listened to the audio recording. This is substantial evidence of corporate fraud, he confirmed, echoing Bill's assessment. And the recording clearly establishes their affair and initial plans to defraud your son through divorce, but not the attempted murder, I finished for him. Not conclusively, no. He handed back my tablet. We have motive and opportunity, but no direct evidence connecting them to the tampering with your son's vehicle. Which is why I need to access Jason's home office, I explained. They're desperate to find something there, something they believe could incriminate them. Detective Sullivan considered this carefully. Mrs. Caldwell, I understand your determination, but what you're proposing is risky. These individuals have already demonstrated they're willing to resort to extreme measures. I'm aware of the danger, I acknowledged, but I also know they don't view me as a threat. To them, I'm just a distraught mother, focused solely on my son's recovery. Which gives you a certain advantage, he conceded. But entering that house alone? Who said anything about alone? I interrupted, a plan crystallizing as I spoke. Vanessa has been insisting that I stay at their house instead of driving back and forth to my condo. I've been refusing, but if I were to accept, you'd have access to the house, he finished thoughtfully. But the office has a separate security system you mentioned. Yes, but Jason always used meaningful numbers for his passwords, dates, addresses, things significant to him personally. I smiled slightly. I was a psychology professor for 40 years, detective. I understand how people select codes they'll remember. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, here's what I propose. You accept Vanessa's invitation to stay at the house. While there, you attempt to access Jason's office. But he held up a hand as I began to respond. You'll be wearing a wire, and I'll have plainclothes officers in the vicinity, ready to intervene if necessary. It was a reasonable compromise between allowing me to pursue the evidence and ensuring my safety. Agreed, I said. When can you have the surveillance equipment ready? Tomorrow, he replied. In the meantime, I'll begin a discreet background investigation into both suspects. Financial records, communications, recent purchases that might relate to vehicle tampering. They'll be visiting Jason again this evening, I informed him. I'll accept Vanessa's invitation then. Tell her I'll collect some things from my condo in the morning and join her tomorrow afternoon. Perfect, Sullivan nodded. That gives us time to prepare properly. I'll meet you at your condo at 10 a.m. tomorrow to set up the wire and review the plan. As our impromptu meeting concluded, Bill Hawkins returned, having given us privacy for our discussion. What's the verdict? He asked, looking between us. We have a plan, Detective Sullivan replied. Not without risk, but with appropriate precautions. Margaret will be staying at her son's house, Bill surmised, his expression concerned. Just temporarily, I assured him. Long enough to access Jason's office and find whatever they're so desperate to keep hidden. Bill didn't look entirely convinced, but nodded reluctantly. What about Jason's security in the meantime? If they realize you're investigating... I've already spoken with hospital security, Sullivan said. We've arranged for an officer to be stationed on the ICU floor, ostensibly due to an unrelated patient matter. He'll keep an eye on your son's room without drawing attention. The thoroughness of his preparations reassured me. Detective Sullivan clearly took the threat to Jason seriously, despite the unofficial nature of his involvement thus far. Thank you both, I said sincerely, for believing me, for helping. I know how this might have sounded initially, an emotional mother creating conspiracy theories to explain a tragic accident. You're anything but hysterical, Margaret, Bill said kindly, and the evidence you've gathered speaks for itself. I should get back to Jason, I said, glancing at my watch. Vanessa and Scott typically return from dinner around 7 p.m. I want to be there when they arrive. Remember, Detective Sullivan cautioned as I prepared to leave, continue as you have been, the concerned mother, nothing more. Give them no reason to suspect you're onto them. I've been playing that role my entire life, Detective, I replied with a grim smile. The harmless older woman that no one views as a threat. It's the most powerful disguise in the world. As I made my way back to the ICU, I mentally rehearsed how I would accept Vanessa's invitation. The hesitation I would show, the reluctant acquiescence, the grateful acceptance of her kindness. Every word, every expression would need to be perfectly calibrated to maintain my cover while advancing our plan. Outside Jason's room, I paused, gathering my strength. The weight of what I was undertaking pressed upon me. Not just the physical danger, but the emotional toll of continuing to interact with the people who had tried to kill my son, who might still succeed if we didn't stop them. I won't let them hurt you again, I whispered, looking through the window at Jason's still form. Whatever it takes. Then I straightened my shoulders, adjusted my expression to one of maternal concern, tinged with exhaustion, and entered the room to continue my vigil and my deception. Vanessa's reaction when I finally accepted her invitation to stay at their house was a masterpiece of false sincerity. Relief flickered briefly in her eyes, no doubt at the prospect of having me where she could monitor my activities, before being replaced by practiced compassion. "I'm so glad, Margaret," she said, squeezing my hand. "You shouldn't be alone at a time like this, and the guest room is so comfortable. Plus, you'll be closer to the hospital." "That's very thoughtful, dear," I replied, injecting just the right amount of gratitude into my voice. "I'll go to my condo in the morning to pack a few things. Scott can drive you," she offered immediately. "No need to trouble him," I countered quickly, alarmed at the prospect of being alone with Scott. My neighbor Elaine has already offered to help me. She'll drop me at your place tomorrow afternoon. Vanessa nodded, though I caught the slight narrowing of her eyes at this adjustment to her plan. Well, I'll make sure everything is ready for you. The following morning, Detective Sullivan arrived at my condo precisely at 10 a.m., carrying what appeared to be an ordinary briefcase. I had spent a sleepless night going over everything I knew about Jason's security habits, trying to anticipate what codes he might have used for his home office. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell," Sullivan greeted me professionally, though his eyes conveyed genuine concern. "Are you still certain about this approach?" "Absolutely," I replied, leading him to my living room. "Have you found anything in your preliminary investigation?" "Several items of interest," he confirmed, opening his briefcase on my coffee table. "Scott Palmer made a purchase at an auto parts store 3 days before your son's accident. We're working on obtaining the security footage to confirm what he bought. And Vanessa? She's been making unusual cash withdrawals for the past 2 months. Small amounts, but they add up to nearly $50,000. He pulled out what looked like an ordinary pendant on a chain. "This is your recording device. The pendant contains a high-quality microphone that will transmit to a receiver in our surveillance vehicle." I examined the silver oval with its simple floral design. Tasteful, age-appropriate, and completely inconspicuous. "It's perfect. The range is approximately 300 feet, so we'll need to stay relatively close to the house." He demonstrated how to activate it with a subtle pressure on one side of the pendant. "Once inside, your priority is Jason's office. If you can access it without raising suspicions, document whatever you find. Photos, files, anything that might connect them to the tampering of your son's vehicle." I nodded, mentally reviewing the layout of Jason and Vanessa's expansive colonial-style home. "The office is on the first floor, at the back of the house. Vanessa will likely try to keep me in the guest bedroom upstairs or in common areas." "Don't take unnecessary risks," Sullivan cautioned. "If you can't access the office without arousing suspicion, we'll find another approach." "Understood." I clasped the pendant around my neck, feeling its weight as both a protection and a responsibility. "What about Jason? Any change in his condition?" "I spoke with Dr. Hawkins this morning. The intracranial pressure continues to stabilize. They're considering beginning to reduce his sedation tomorrow if the improvement continues." This news, while medically positive, added urgency to our mission. Once Jason began regaining consciousness, Vanessa and Scott's timeline would accelerate. They couldn't risk him waking up and revealing what he knew. Detective Sullivan must have read my thoughts. "We've increased security around your son's room. No one can access him without going through multiple checkpoints, and we've restricted medication administration to senior staff only." "Thank you," I said, genuinely relieved, "for taking this seriously, for helping protect him." "Mrs. Caldwell," he replied solemnly, "attempted murder is always serious, regardless of how circumstantial the initial evidence may be." By 2 p.m., I was being driven to Jason and Vanessa's house by a female detective posing as my neighbor Elaine. Detective Sullivan and his team had established surveillance positions in the neighborhood, with a nondescript utility van parked within range of my transmitter. "Remember," the female detective, Lauren Mitchell, reminded me as we approached the house, "we're monitoring continuously. If at any point you feel threatened, use the code phrase, 'I should call my bridge partner,' and we'll intervene immediately." "I'll be careful," I promised, as we pulled into the circular driveway of the colonial home that Jason had been so proud to purchase 3 years ago. It was a beautiful property, 5 bedrooms, professionally landscaped grounds, a showcase of success that now felt tainted by Vanessa's betrayal. Vanessa opened the door before we could ring the bell, her perfect smile in place. "Margaret, you're right on time. And this must be Elaine?" Detective Mitchell played her part flawlessly, exuding the chatty concern of a helpful neighbor as she carried my suitcase inside. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, she departed with a promise to check in tomorrow, leaving me alone with Vanessa in the marble-floored foyer. "Let me show you to the guest room," Vanessa said, leading me up the sweeping staircase. "I've put you in the blue room. It has the most comfortable bed and a lovely view of the garden." The blue guest room was indeed beautiful, decorated in serene tones with expensive linens and tasteful artwork. It was also, I noted, the furthest room from the master suite and positioned directly above the kitchen, meaning any movement downstairs to Jason's office would be easily heard. "It's lovely," I said sincerely, setting my handbag on the bed. "You have such a beautiful home, Vanessa." "Thank you," she replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the duvet. "Jason worked so hard to afford it." "We both did." She glanced at her watch. "I've prepared some lunch downstairs if you're hungry." After that, I thought we might visit Jason together. "Wonderful," I agreed, noting how she was already establishing a schedule that would keep me by her side. "Though I confess I'm a bit tired from all the emotional strain. I might need to rest this afternoon." "Of course," she said with practiced sympathy. "Why don't you join me for lunch and then you can nap while I run a few errands? I'll wake you when it's time to go to the hospital." It was the opportunity I'd been hoping for. Time alone in the house. "That sounds perfect, dear." Over a lunch of artfully prepared salads that neither of us had much appetite for, I maintained light conversation, carefully steering topics away from Jason's accident or his work. Instead, I asked about the house, the neighborhood, Vanessa's family, subjects that allowed her to focus on herself rather than question my intentions. "I should be gone about 2 hours," she informed me after lunch, collecting her purse and car keys. "Make yourself at home, but please rest. You look exhausted, Margaret." "I feel it," I admitted truthfully, allowing my genuine fatigue to show. "A nap sounds heavenly." As her car disappeared down the driveway, I touched the pendant at my throat. "She's gone," I said quietly, knowing Detective Sullivan and his team would be listening. "I'm going to try accessing Jason's office now." I moved swiftly through the house to the rear hallway where Jason's home office was located. The door was locked, as expected, with a keypad security system beside it. I studied the keypad thoughtfully, considering what code Jason might have chosen. Our old address? His birth date? My birth date? None seemed secure enough for sensitive financial documents. Then I remembered. Jason had always used a particular date for important passwords. February 17th, 1984. The day his father had taken him to his first baseball game, months before the heart attack that claimed Henry's life. It had been a perfect day, one that Jason had treasured as his most precious memory of his father. With steady fingers, I punched in EO2171984. The light turned green, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. "I'm in," I whispered to the pendant microphone as the office door swung open. The code was the date of Jason's first baseball game with his father. I stepped into the meticulously organized space that reflected my son's methodical nature. Dark wood shelving lined one wall, filled with financial texts and industry references. His desk, a substantial cherry piece that had been his father's, faced the window overlooking the garden. Everything was precisely arranged, from the dual computer monitors to the color-coded files in the credenza behind the desk. "They're looking for evidence of fraud in their affair," I murmured, scanning the room. "But what Jason found must be more specific, something that directly implicates them in the theft." I moved to the computer first, not surprised to find it password protected. Trying the same code as the door yielded no results. This would be a different password, likely more complex. After 2 more unsuccessful attempts with significant dates, I abandoned that approach, not wanting to trigger any security alerts. Instead, I turned my attention to the physical files. The credenza drawers were unlocked, containing neatly labeled folders: taxes, investments, household expenses. Nothing immediately suspicious, though I noted Vanessa's personal financial information was conspicuously absent. "Where would you hide something important, Jason?" I asked softly, thinking like my son. "Not in obvious filing cabinets, not on his main computer. Somewhere secure but accessible, disguised but logical." My eyes fell on a row of leather-bound volumes on the bookshelf, financial yearbooks and industry reports. Among them sat a slightly different binding, a photo album labeled Fishing Trip 2019. Jason didn't fish. He'd always hated it, despite his father's attempts to interest him in the sport. I pulled the album from the shelf, my heart racing as I opened it. Instead of photographs, the pages contained clear plastic sleeves holding USB drives, SD cards, and what appeared to be a small voice recorder. Each was labeled with dates and cryptic abbreviations. "I've found something," I reported to Sullivan. "Storage devices hidden in a fake photo album. This must be what they're looking for." I carefully removed a USB drive labeled WBFS Complete with last month's date, likely standing for Westbrook Financial Summary. Returning to the desk, I searched for a way to view its contents. A quick examination revealed a laptop docking station, partially hidden by the monitor stand, with a USB port accessible from the front. Taking a deep breath, I plugged in the drive. The computer required no additional password to access its contents, just as I'd hoped. Jason would have wanted the evidence accessible even if he couldn't personally retrieve it. The drive contained hundreds of files, meticulously organized into folders: financial records, email correspondence, audio recordings, and, most promising, a folder simply titled Evidence. I clicked on the evidence folder first, finding a comprehensive document that appeared to be Jason's case summary. He had discovered the fraud nearly 3 months ago and had been quietly gathering evidence since. The document detailed how Vanessa and Scott had created fake vendor accounts, approved fictional services, and diverted payments to offshore accounts they controlled. But it was the final section that made my blood run cold. Personal connection. Here, Jason had documented his growing suspicion that Vanessa was involved, including photographs taken from what appeared to be a hidden camera in his home office. The images showed Vanessa searching his desk late at night, photographing documents, and accessing his computer when she thought he was away on business trips. Most damning was a transcript from the voice recorder I'd seen in the album. Conversations between Vanessa and Scott recorded in this very office during Jason's supposed business trips. They discussed not just the fraud, but their relationship and future plans in explicit detail. They didn't know he was recording them, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. He set up surveillance in his own office when he became suspicious. I scrolled further, finding a final entry dated just 1 day before the accident. Jason had written, "Confronted V tonight about discrepancies. Didn't reveal full knowledge. Her reaction confirmed suspicions. Calling Reynolds tomorrow to report findings. Audio and video evidence secured in secondary location as insurance." "Detective Sullivan," I said urgently to the pendant, "Jason confronted Vanessa the night before the accident, and he was planning to report the fraud to someone named Reynolds the next day. That must have triggered their decision to sabotage his car." I quickly checked the audio recordings folder, finding files labeled with dates and times. I clicked on one from 3 days before the accident. Scott's voice came through clearly. "We need to think about contingencies." "If Jason has connected the dots—" "He hasn't," Vanessa interrupted. "He's working late on the Anderson account, completely oblivious. But if he does, we need to be ready. The beach house is paid for through that shell company. Untraceable. We could be in Brazil within 24 hours. "You worry too much," Vanessa replied. "Everything's in place. 2 more transfers and we're set for life. Just keep your nerve for a few more weeks." I closed that file and opened another. This one dated the evening before the accident. Likely the confrontation Jason had mentioned in his notes. "What are you implying?" Vanessa's voice, tense and defensive. "I'm not implying anything," Jason replied calmly. "I'm simply asking why your signature is on approval forms for vendors that don't seem to exist. That's ridiculous. You know how many forms I sign every day in accounting. I can't verify every single vendor. These particular vendors have received over $2 million in the past year, Vanessa, for services no one can actually describe." A pause then. "You're tracking my signatures? Spying on me?" "Not spying. Just following the money. It's my job." "This is absurd. I'm going to bed. When you're ready to apologize for these accusations, you know where to find me." The recording ended there. I quickly copied the entire USB drive to my phone, which I had connected to the computer. While the transfer progressed, I examined the voice recorder from the album. It contained more recent recordings, including one labeled Contingency Plan from the morning of the accident. I pressed play, my hands trembling slightly. "He knows something," Scott's voice urgent and low. "He's been asking questions about the offshore transfers." "Maybe it's time for our insurance policy," Vanessa replied, her tone chillingly detached. "You mean the brake line, just like we discussed. If it looks like an accident, no one asks questions, especially with the mountain roads he takes to work." "Jesus, Vanessa, that's not what we—" "Don't get squeamish now, Scott. It's $2 million. And me. Isn't that worth a little risk?" My heart pounded against my ribs as the full implications sank in. This wasn't just evidence of fraud and betrayal. It was premeditated attempted murder, recorded in their own voices. The file transfer completed just as I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, the distant purr of a car engine in the driveway. Vanessa was returning, far earlier than expected. "She's back," I whispered urgently into the pendant. I need more time. There's conclusive evidence here. I quickly disconnected my phone, but left the USB drive in place, wanting to check one more crucial folder before leaving. With shaking hands, I opened email correspondence, finding a series of messages between Scott and someone identified only as VR, discussing the details of how to tamper with brake lines to ensure failure at high speeds. The sound of the front door opening galvanized me into action. I snapped a few quick photographs of the email with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its original position, removing the USB drive and replacing it in the album. I returned the album to the exact spot on the shelf where I'd found it. "Margaret?" Vanessa's voice called from the foyer. "Are you awake?" I slipped out of the office, quietly closing the door behind me and ensuring the lock re-engaged. Heart pounding, I moved quickly down the hall and into the powder room, flushing the toilet and running the sink to establish my alibi. "In here," I called back, my voice remarkably steady despite the damning evidence now secured on my phone. "Just freshening up. I thought you'd be gone longer." "The errands didn't take as long as expected," she replied as I emerged from the bathroom. "Did you manage to get some rest?" "I was just about to lie down," I said, forcing a smile. "But now that you're back, perhaps we could visit Jason instead. I'm anxious to see if there's any change." "Of course," she agreed, though I noticed her gaze flick briefly down the hallway toward Jason's office door. "Let me just grab my purse." As I followed her back to the foyer, I touched the pendant discreetly. "Mission accomplished," I whispered. "I have everything we need." The drive to the hospital with Vanessa was an exercise in psychological control. Sitting beside the woman who had calmly discussed murdering my son, who still planned to finish the job if necessary, required every ounce of my acting ability. I maintained a gentle stream of innocuous conversation about the weather, the garden, my bridge club, all while the evidence of her crimes burned a hole in my pocket. "Dr. Hawkins called while you were resting," Vanessa mentioned as we approached the hospital. "They're planning to begin reducing Jason's sedation tomorrow morning if his indicators remain stable overnight." "That's wonderful news," I said, infusing my voice with genuine relief while carefully observing her reaction. "Yes," she agreed, her knuckles whitening slightly on the steering wheel, though the doctor cautioned that recovery from traumatic brain injuries can be unpredictable. Memory loss is common, confusion, disorientation. She was already laying groundwork, I realized, preparing explanations for why Jason might not remember what happened, or why his recollections might be dismissed as unreliable. "I'm sure he'll receive the best care," I replied mildly, "and we'll be there to help him through the recovery process." As we entered the hospital, I spotted Detective Sullivan near the visitor's desk, dressed in civilian clothes and pretending to review a clipboard. Our eyes met briefly. He gave an imperceptible nod, confirming he had received the evidence I'd transmitted from the house. The ICU was quieter than usual, with fewer staff visible in the corridors. As we approached Jason's room, I noticed an unfamiliar security guard stationed nearby, undoubtedly one of Sullivan's people positioned as protection. Mrs. Caldwell," Heather greeted us professionally as we entered Jason's room. "Dr. Hawkins asked me to inform you he'll be stopping by in about 20 minutes to discuss tomorrow's plan." "Thank you, Nurse Jenkins," Vanessa replied with practiced politeness. I moved immediately to Jason's bedside, studying his face for any signs of change. The bruising had faded somewhat, shifting to yellows and greens around the edges, and his color seemed slightly better. Most promising of all, he appeared to be breathing more naturally, with less reliance on the ventilator. "He looks better," I observed, squeezing his hand gently. "Yes, he's responding well to treatment," Heather confirmed. "The latest brain scans show significant reduction in swelling." Vanessa's phone chimed with a text message. She checked it, her expression momentarily tightening before she composed herself. "Scott will be joining us shortly," she announced. "He was meeting with the insurance adjusters about Jason's car." "How thoughtful," I remarked, wondering what the text really said. Had Scott discovered that Jason's office had been accessed? Were they accelerating their timeline? 20 minutes of tense small talk later, Scott appeared in the doorway. He nodded to me politely before exchanging a meaningful glance with Vanessa. "Margaret, it's good to see you," he said, approaching to kiss my cheek, a gesture that now made my skin crawl. "How was your first afternoon at the house? Comfortable, I hope." "Very," I assured him. Though I mostly rested, it's been an exhausting few days. Of course, he agreed sympathetically. Dr. Hawkins arrived moments later, bringing a deliberate energy into the room. Good afternoon, everyone. I've just reviewed Jason's latest tests, and I'm pleased to report that we're on track to begin reducing sedation early tomorrow morning. What does that mean exactly? Vanessa asked, her voice carefully modulated to display appropriate concern. We'll gradually decrease the medications, keeping him in the medically induced coma, Bill explained. The process is slow. It could take 24 to 48 hours before we see signs of consciousness returning. And when he wakes up? Scott interjected. What should we expect? Patients emerging from induced comas typically experience confusion, disorientation, and often temporary memory gaps, Bill replied, watching them closely. Some never fully recover memories from just before the trauma. It's a protective mechanism of the brain. I saw the subtle exchange of glances between Vanessa and Scott, relief poorly disguised as concern. The most important thing, Bill continued, looking directly at me, is that he'll have familiar, supportive people around him when he begins to regain consciousness. Family who can help ground him and re-establish his sense of self. I'll be here, I said firmly, every step of the way. We all will, Vanessa added quickly. Whatever he needs. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. Detective Sullivan stepped into the room, now wearing his badge visibly on his belt. Excuse me, Doctor. Hawkins, he said professionally. May I have a word? Bill nodded, stepping outside briefly with Sullivan. When they returned, the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. Mrs. Caldwell, Sullivan addressed me formally, maintaining our pretense of being strangers. I'm Detective Sullivan with Boston PD. I need to ask you a few questions about your son's accident, if you don't mind. Of course, I agreed, feigning mild confusion. Actually, he continued, turning to face Vanessa and Scott, I'll need to speak with all of you, separately if possible. Is something wrong, Detective? Vanessa asked, her composure impressive despite the sudden tension in her shoulders. Just following up on some inconsistencies in the accident report, Sullivan replied casually. Standard procedure. Mrs. Caldwell, would you mind coming with me first? We can use the consultation room down the hall. I rose, playing my part in our choreographed scenario. Certainly, Detective. Will this take long? Not at all. Just a few routine questions. As we left the room, I noticed Heather moving to adjust Jason's IV, positioning herself between him and Vanessa, I realized. Another layer of protection, while Sullivan set our plan in motion. In the consultation room, Sullivan dropped the pretense immediately. The evidence you gathered is compelling, Mrs. Caldwell. Particularly the audio recordings planning the brake line tampering. We have enough to make arrests now. Good, I said, the single word containing all my pent-up fury and determination. What happens next? I've arranged for 2 additional officers to be stationed in the ICU. When I return to question Vanessa and Scott, they'll be watching for any suspicious reactions. If either attempts to flee or approach Jason in a threatening manner, they'll intervene immediately. And if they don't? If they maintain their composure? Then I'll continue the questioning until my colleagues have secured the search warrant for your son's house. Once we have that, we'll formally place them under arrest. He studied me with professional concern. Are you prepared for what comes next? This will likely become intense very quickly. Detective Sullivan, I replied steadily. I've spent 3 days pretending not to know that these people tried to murder my son. I'm more than ready for this to end. He nodded, respecting my resolve. One last thing. When we return, I'll be asking them directly about the brake line tampering and the financial fraud. Their reactions may be unpredictable. Stay behind me at all times. Understood, I agreed. When we re-entered Jason's room, Vanessa and Scott were standing close together near the window, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly at our appearance. Bill Hawkins had remained, positioning himself near Jason's bed alongside Heather. Mr. Palmer, Mrs. Caldwell, Sullivan said formally, thank you for your patience. Before we continue with individual questions, I'd like to clarify something about Mr. Caldwell's vehicle. Of course, Scott replied, his casual tone belied by the tension visible in his jaw. Our forensic team has determined that the brake line on Mr. Caldwell's car was deliberately compromised, Sullivan stated bluntly, watching their reactions. This was not an accident. It was attempted murder. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa recovered first, her expression shifting to shocked disbelief with practiced precision. That's impossible. Who would want to hurt Jason? That's exactly what we're investigating, Sullivan replied evenly. Along with the $2 million that's been embezzled from Westbrook Pharmaceuticals through fake vendor accounts over the past 18 months. The color drained from Scott's face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Mr. Palmer, Sullivan countered, removing his phone from his pocket. In fact, I have an audio recording I'd like you both to listen to. Without waiting for a response, he played the damning recording I'd discovered in Jason's office, Vanessa and Scott discussing tampering with the brake lines, their voices filling the suddenly silent room. Vanessa's perfectly composed facade cracked, genuine panic flashing in her eyes. That's been manipulated, edited. That's not what— We have multiple recordings, Mrs. Caldwell, Sullivan interrupted calmly, along with email correspondence discussing the technical details of brake line tampering, and a comprehensive record of the financial fraud you and Mr. Palmer have been conducting at Westbrook. Scott's survival instincts kicked in. He lunged toward the door, only to find it blocked by one of Sullivan's officers who had entered silently during the confrontation. Vanessa remained frozen, her calculating mind visibly racing for an escape route that didn't exist. Scott Palmer, Vanessa Caldwell, Sullivan announced formally. You're both under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. As Sullivan continued reciting their Miranda rights, I moved to Jason's bedside, positioning myself protectively between him and the people who had tried to kill him. Watching as handcuffs were placed on Vanessa's slender wrists, I felt no satisfaction, only profound relief that my son was finally safe and that justice would be served. It's over, I whispered to Jason, holding his hand tightly. They can't hurt you anymore. Now, you just need to wake up. 5 days passed before Jason opened his eyes. 5 days of hopeful waiting as Dr. Hawkins gradually reduced the sedation medications. 5 days of sitting by his bedside, reading aloud from his favorite books, playing the classical music he'd loved since childhood, and gently recounting happy memories from his youth. 5 days of watching for any flicker of consciousness, any sign that my son was returning to me. The arrest of Vanessa and Scott had made headlines in the local papers. Pharmaceutical executives charged in fraud scheme and attempted murder. Westbrook's stock had temporarily plummeted before stabilizing as the company rushed to assure investors that the fraud had been isolated to specific individuals, now removed. Jason's colleagues had expressed shock and support in equal measure, many sending cards and flowers that now filled his hospital room. Detective Sullivan visited daily, updating me on the case's progress. The evidence I'd discovered, combined with material from the subsequent police search of the house and Scott's apartment, had created an airtight case. They're not getting bail, he informed me on the 5th morning, stopping by before heading to court. The prosecutor convinced the judge they were flight risks, given the documented plans to flee to Brazil and the beach house purchased through shell companies. Have they said anything? I asked, looking up from the book I'd been reading to Jason. Tried to explain. Scott's talking, Sullivan confirmed, trying to cut a deal by placing most of the blame on Vanessa. Claims she masterminded the fraud and the murder attempt. He shook his head disgustedly. She's smarter, hasn't said a word except to her lawyer, but it doesn't matter. The recordings speak for themselves. And the evidence is secure? I pressed, my academic mind still concerned about procedural details. They can't claim it was obtained illegally? Everything's clean, he assured me. We had the search warrant before seizing the recordings from the house, and Jason's own documentation establishes provenance. He created those recordings legally in his own home and office. The case is solid, Mrs. Caldwell. After Sullivan left, I returned to my vigil, continuing where I'd left off in The Old Man and the Sea, the Hemingway novel Jason had studied for his high school English class, writing an essay that had made me proudly display it on our refrigerator for months. But man is not made for defeat, I read softly, holding Jason's hand. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. His fingers twitched in mine. I froze, watching his face intently. Had I imagined it? After so many false alarms, so many moments when I thought I'd detected movement only to be disappointed, I was wary of hoping too quickly. Then his eyelids fluttered, and a small groan escaped his lips. Jason, I whispered, pressing the call button for the nurse. Jason, can you hear me? It's Mom. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. He blinked several times, his gaze gradually settling on my face. "Mom?" His voice was a barely audible rasp after days of intubation. "Yes, sweetheart," I confirmed, tears of relief flooding my eyes. "I'm here. You're in the hospital. You've been unconscious for over a week." Heather rushed in, immediately checking his vital signs and pupillary response. "Welcome back, Mr. Caldwell," she said professionally, though I caught the genuine warmth in her tone. "Try not to talk too much just yet. Your throat will be sore from the breathing tube." Jason's eyes darted around the room, confusion evident. "What happened?" he managed, each word clearly an effort. "You were in a car accident," I explained gently. "Your car went off the road. Do you remember anything?" His brow furrowed with concentration. Driving, brakes, wouldn't work. The effort of speaking exhausted him, his eyes drifting closed again. "That's enough for now," Heather advised quietly. "This is normal. He'll drift in and out as the last of the sedation wears off. Each period of consciousness should get longer and clearer." Dr. Hawkins arrived minutes later, conducting a thorough examination as Jason dozed. "His initial responses are very encouraging," he told me afterward. "Pupils equal and reactive, appropriate verbal responses, recognition of family. These are all positive indicators for cognitive recovery." "When will he be fully alert?" I asked, still holding Jason's hand. "It varies patient by patient," Bill explained. "But typically, we see significant improvement over the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm optimistic, Margaret." Throughout the day, Jason woke several more times, each period of consciousness slightly longer and more coherent than the last. By evening, he was able to stay awake for nearly 30 minutes, though his speech remained halting and his memories fragmented. "Vanessa?" he asked during one such period, his eyes searching the room. "Where is she?" I had dreaded this question, unsure how much to reveal in his fragile state. Bill had cautioned against overwhelming him with too much information too quickly, yet I refused to lie to my son. "Jason," I said gently, "there's something you need to know about Vanessa and Scott, but it can wait until you're stronger." "No," he insisted, his voice gaining strength despite its hoarseness. "Tell me. Now, please." I met his gaze, seeing determination beneath the confusion. My son had always preferred difficult truths to comforting lies. "They've been arrested," I said simply. "The police found evidence that they were embezzling money from Westbrook, and that they tampered with your car. The accident wasn't an accident." Jason closed his eyes, pain crossing his features that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. When he opened them again, they were clearer than they had been since waking. "I knew," he whispered, "about the fraud, found evidence. Confronted Vanessa the night before." He trailed off, the memory visibly distressing him. "I know," I assured him, squeezing his hand. "We found the evidence you gathered, the recordings, the documentation. That's how they were caught." A question formed in his eyes. "How did you—" "It's a long story," I smiled slightly. "One I'll tell you when you're stronger. But the short version is that a very observant nurse became suspicious of Vanessa and Scott's behavior. She warned me, helped me overhear a conversation between them that revealed everything. After that, well, let's just say your old mother turned amateur detective." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You always said psychology was just detective work, by another name." "That's right," I agreed, encouraged by this flash of his old self. "Understanding human behavior, recognizing patterns, looking beyond what people show on the surface to what they're really thinking and feeling." He nodded slightly, then asked the question I'd been anticipating. "Will I recover? Completely?" "Dr. Hawkins is very optimistic," I told him truthfully. "Your brain swelling has resolved well, and you're already showing good cognitive function. There will be physical therapy, of course, and some challenges ahead, but he believes you'll make a substantial recovery." Jason absorbed this information, then surprised me with a faint squeeze of my hand. "Thank you for being here, for everything." "Where else would I be?" I replied simply. "You're my son." As evening deepened into night, Jason drifted into natural sleep, his breathing steady and unlabored. I remained in the chair beside his bed, unwilling to leave even for a moment. Detective Sullivan stopped by one last time before heading home, bringing coffee and a sandwich for me. "How's he doing?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Jason's sleeping form. "Better than expected," I replied. He remembers fragments of what happened. He knew about the fraud, confronted Vanessa the night before the accident. Sullivan nodded. That matches the timeline we've established. Her text messages to Scott spiked immediately after that confrontation, though they were careful to use coded language. Not careful enough, I observed. Few criminals are, in the end, he agreed. Arrogance, panic, or simple oversight, something always trips them up. He studied me with professional admiration, though in this case, it was largely due to one very determined mother. I did what any parent would do, I demurred. No, Mrs. Caldwell, you did what few would have had the courage or capability to do. He rose to leave. I'll check in tomorrow. The DA wants to schedule a formal statement from Jason once he's strong enough. After Sullivan departed, I settled back in my chair, watching the gentle rise and fall of Jason's chest. The past 10 days had been a nightmare of fear, discovery, and danger, but now, finally, I could see the path forward. My son would recover, justice would be served, and somehow we would rebuild what had been broken, finding our way back to normalcy, or perhaps something even stronger than before. As I finally allowed myself to drift toward sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. When I had rushed to the hospital that first day, desperate with fear for my son, I could never have imagined the journey that lay ahead. The warning from Nurse Jenkins, "Please hide and trust me," had changed everything, setting in motion events that ultimately saved Jason's life. Sometimes, I reflected drowsily, the most important moments in our lives arrive disguised as simple choices: to listen, to observe, to trust, to act. And sometimes, the most underestimated force in the world is exactly what had driven me through the darkest days of this ordeal. The quiet, implacable determination of a mother protecting her child. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment with a rating from 0 to 10. Subscribe to the channel and share this story with a friend.